The police arrived at 11:43 in the morning on a Tuesday in October, and I remember that detail because I had just poured my second cup of coffee and was standing at the kitchen window, watching the leaves come down from the oak tree in the backyard when the patrol car pulled up in front of Dolores Nakamura's house. I did not call them. I did not need to. My 11-year-old daughter, Ren, had taken care of that 2 weeks before any of us knew a crime had been committed. Some people in my family still think I went too far. I need you to tell me whether I did. The violin had been in our family for 6 years. Ren started playing when she was 5, on a rental from the music school on Birchfield Avenue. By the time she was 8, her instructor, a quiet Romanian man named Florin Badia, told me she had outgrown every student instrument he had ever seen in 30 years of teaching. He said it with this particular kind of sadness that teachers get when they realize a student has already surpassed the reach of what they can offer in a school context. He recommended we invest in something real, something that would grow with her. We spent 4 months researching, drove 3 hours to a dealer in the city, and walked out with a handcrafted instrument appraised at $3,400. I paid cash from the college fund I had been building for Ren since she was 18 months old. Her pediatrician, Dr. Amara Osai, had once told me that music training at Ren's level of engagement produces measurable neurological advantages for academic performance. I already knew that. But it was good to have a doctor confirm what any mother watching her daughter play could see in the child's face. Ren did not just play the violin. She became something else entirely when she held it. My husband's mother, Dolores Nakamura, sold it at an estate sale for $3,400. She found it in her garage. She cleaned it out, she priced it, she sold it, and when Ren found out, she did not cry. She looked at me with this steady expression that I had seen before, usually right before she played something technically difficult, this complete internal composure that she had clearly developed on her own without anyone teaching her. She picked up her phone, scrolled for about 4 seconds, and handed it to me without a word. On the screen was a video she had recorded 2 weeks earlier. I pressed play. That violin actually belonged to, she began, in her clear, careful 11-year-old voice, and then the screen went dark for a half-second before her image reappeared and she finished the sentence. That was when I understood that my daughter had been smarter than all of us for longer than any of us had noticed. Let me tell you how we got here. I married Daniel Nakamura 9 years ago on a Saturday in June that was 17 degrees hotter than anyone had predicted, and I remember thinking as I stood at the back of the venue that the heat was the universe's way of being honest about what I was walking into. Not with Daniel. Daniel was good then, and he is good now. A structural engineer with a methodical mind and a gift for staying calm in exactly the moments when calm is the hardest thing to maintain. What I mean is that I was walking into a family with a center of gravity that had nothing to do with me and never intended to include me. Dolores Nakamura had 3 children: Daniel, his older sister Camille, and his younger brother Theo. She had spent 40 years as a property manager for a commercial real estate firm in the east part of the city before retiring, and she carried herself with the particular authority of a woman who has spent 4 decades controlling access to spaces. She decided who got in and who did not. She knew it. She enjoyed it. And when Daniel brought me home the first time, a then 28-year-old woman named Nora Scott from a regular family in a regular suburb with a regular savings account and no connection to the Nakamura family's social network, Dolores looked at me the way a building manager looks at a lease application from someone she already knows she is going to decline. She was never openly cruel. I want to be precise about that because precision matters here. Dolores Nakamura was skilled. She operated through omission and diminishment and the particular social violence of being treated as an afterthought by someone who is perfectly warm to everyone else in the room. The first incident I remember clearly happened at Daniel's birthday dinner, about 4 months after we started dating. Dolores had organized a small gathering at her house, maybe 12 people, mostly family. She introduced everyone by name and relationship. His cousin by her first and last name, his college roommate with a warm story about how they had met. When she got to me, she gestured in my direction without quite looking at me and said, "And this is the girl Daniel has been seeing." She moved on before anyone could respond. I smiled. I reached across the table and poured myself more water. That night, I called my college friend Renata Diallo, who had been watching Dolores for the 2 hours we were there, and Renata said, "Nora, that woman is going to be a problem." I told Renata I knew. I told her I was thinking about it. What I did not tell her was that I had already scheduled a meeting with a financial advisor named Gordon Chu for the following Thursday. Not because of Dolores. The meeting had been on my calendar for 6 weeks. But sitting in that dining room, being gestured at like a footnote, I felt something harden inside me that I had not previously known was soft. I left that dinner with a very specific kind of clarity. I was not going to be the girl Daniel had been seeing. I was going to be the person in that marriage who made sure that no matter what happened, Ren would never need anything from a family that had already decided she was a footnote. I did not say any of that out loud. I just scheduled the meeting. Daniel proposed 11 months later. Dolores hosted the engagement dinner. She gave a toast that lasted 4 minutes and 40 seconds, which I know because Renata timed it on her phone under the table. In those 4 minutes and 40 seconds, Dolores referenced Daniel's childhood, his academic achievements, the Nakamura family's history of strong marriages, and her hope that her grandchildren would carry on certain traditions. She did not say my name once. Not once. I sat at that table in a dress I had paid $400 for, with a ring on my left hand that had belonged to Daniel's grandmother, and I did not exist inside the woman's toast. Camille, Daniel's older sister, caught my eye across the table during the applause. She looked away first. Camille was not cruel in the way Dolores was. She was complicit in the quieter way, the way of someone who sees clearly what is happening and has decided that the cost of intervening outweighs the discomfort of watching. She had her own reasons. She had always been the child Dolores trusted most, and that position came with requirements. One of them was looking away when the toast did not include the woman her brother loved. Theo, the youngest, was the only one who leaned across the table after the toast and clinked my glass and said, "Welcome to the family, Nora." He meant it. Theo was 23 then and working a construction job and had not yet developed the family skill of performing warmth while withholding it. I liked Theo. I still like Theo. He was the one person in that family who was exactly what he appeared to be. Daniel noticed the omission in the toast. He brought it up in the car on the way home. I put my hand on his and told him his mother was nervous and that toasts are hard and that I was not bothered. I lied without hesitation because I had already decided that making Daniel choose between me and his mother in the first year of our marriage was not a battle I was going to pick up. Not then. The battles I intended to pick up looked different. We moved into our house on Carmichael Street 8 months after the wedding. 3 bedrooms, a decent backyard, a kitchen that needed updating but had good bones. We paid $380,000 for it, a number Daniel and I had decided on together after 3 months of budgeting spreadsheets and 2 consultations with Gordon Chu. The down payment came equally from both of our savings. It was a clean, fair, documented transaction. Both names on the deed. Every cent accounted for. Dolores visited the day after we moved in. She walked through every room with the energy of an inspector rather than a guest, touching the countertops and looking at the ceilings and making small sounds that were not quite comments, but were not quite silence either. In the kitchen, she said the cabinets were the builder's grade and would need replacing eventually. In the master bedroom, she observed that the closet was small for 2 people. In what would become Ren's room, years before Ren existed, she stood in the center of the empty space and said, "Well, it's a starter home." I was carrying a box of kitchen supplies. I set it down on the floor, straightened up, and said, "We love it." She smiled at me in a way that did not reach anything above her mouth. "Of course you do, sweetheart." That night, I called Gordon Chu and asked him to add a monthly contribution to the investment account we had discussed. $300 a month, automatically transferred. It was not a dramatic gesture. It was not a victory. It was just something I decided to do because I had learned in that first year that the most useful response to being dismissed was to build something. Not to argue. Not to perform. To actually build something, quietly, consistently, while the dismissal was still happening. If you have ever been counted out by someone who should have known better, you already know what that silence feels like. Ren was born 2 years into our marriage on a February morning that was so cold the hospital parking lot had an inch of ice across every surface, and Daniel nearly fell twice running to get the car. She came into the world with her eyes open wider than the nurses said they usually were, looking around the delivery room with this alert, assessing quality, like she was already taking inventory. Dr. Osei, who had been my OB through the entire pregnancy, pressed her into my arms and said, This one is going to have opinions. She was not wrong. Dolores arrived at the hospital that afternoon with Camille and a flower arrangement so large it blocked the room's window when she set it on the sill. She held Ren for approximately 7 minutes, said she had her son's nose, and then spent the remaining 40 minutes of the visit talking to Daniel about a property dispute his uncle was having with a neighbor. I was still in the hospital bed. I had given birth 6 hours earlier. I watched this happen and cataloged it in the part of my mind where I kept things that I was not yet ready to use. Ren started walking at 10 months, started talking in full sentences before she was 2. By the time she was 3, she was correcting Daniel's pronunciation of certain words, not to be difficult, but because she genuinely could not tolerate inaccuracy. She got that from somewhere. I have my theories. The violin came when she was 5. The expensive one, the real one, came when she was 8. After Florin Badia sat across from me in his small studio on Birchfield Avenue and told me in his careful, accented English that my daughter was operating in a category he could not fully support anymore. I drove home that afternoon and transferred $2,000 from Ren's college fund, which by that point had grown to $41,000, as a partial payment on the instrument, and paid the remaining $1,400 in cash at the time of purchase. The violin was appraised, insured, documented. I kept the paperwork in a folder in the filing cabinet in our home office, behind the tab marked Musical Instruments. I am a person who keeps paperwork. Dolores saw the violin once, about a month after we bought it. She was at our house for Sunday dinner, which happened roughly once a month in those years, a ritual I had accepted as the cost of maintaining Daniel's relationship with his family. Ren played a short piece for the table after we ate. She was 8, small for her age, standing in the living room doorway with this $3,400 instrument tucked under her chin, playing a Vivaldi movement that Florin had assigned her. She played it perfectly. When she finished, the room was quiet for a moment before the applause. Dolores began the applause. She leaned toward Daniel and said something I could not quite hear, and he nodded and smiled. Later, in the kitchen while I was loading dishes, Camille came in and stood next to me and said, quietly, "Mom thinks it's a lot to spend on a hobby." I handed her a dish to dry without looking up. "It's not a hobby." Camille dried the dish. "I know," she paused. "I'm just telling you what she said." I appreciated that Camille told me. I did not show it, but I appreciated it. It was the most honest exchange we had ever had. That night, after Ren was asleep and Daniel was watching something in the living room, I went to the home office and opened the filing cabinet. I pulled the violin's insurance documentation and looked at it for a moment. $3,400, appraised value, fully covered under our homeowner's policy. My name on the policy, Daniel's name on the policy, Ren's name on the instrument, written in my handwriting on the card inside the case. I put the documentation back. I filed a mental note in the same place I kept everything else. The garage situation started the way most Dolores situations started. She announced what she was doing and presented it as something that had already been decided. She called Daniel in early September to tell him she was cleaning out the garage at the Birchwood Drive house, the house she had lived in for 30 years and had started discussing selling, and that she would need someone to help with the estate sale she was organizing. An estate sale. Her words, not a yard sale, not a moving sale. An estate sale, which in her vocabulary meant a curated, priced, staffed event that she intended to run professionally and profitably. She had, apparently, moved some things from our garage into hers the previous spring. I say apparently because I did not know this had happened. What I later pieced together was that Daniel, in a moment of marital helpfulness that he deeply regretted, had offered to store a few boxes from our garage while we were reorganizing that spring, and that Dolores had collected those boxes personally while Daniel and I were both at work. What was in those boxes was not something either of us had inventoried beforehand. It was a moving day kind of situation, fast and imprecise and trusting. One of those boxes had Ren's violin in it. I do not know how the violin ended up in a box. I have thought about this many times. The most likely explanation is that Ren had left it in the garage at some point, possibly after a practice session, possibly because 11-year-olds are not always meticulous about where they set things down. The case was a hardshell case, dark brown, not obviously marked. If you did not know what you were looking at, it could have been anything. Power tools, a sporting item, a camera. Something you would price at an estate sale and move without asking. Dolores priced it at $3,400. I will give her this. She had a property manager's instinct for value. She looked at that case, opened it, saw the instrument inside, and knew it was worth something. She priced it correctly. She sold it the same afternoon to a man whose name I did not learn until later, a collector from the west side of the city who knew exactly what he was buying and paid cash without negotiating. The sale happened on a Saturday. We found out on the following Monday when Wren went to her case to practice, and it was gone. I am going to be precise about what happened in the next 20 minutes because precision is the only thing I have to offer here that is worth offering. Wren searched the house. She checked every room she could think of with the systematic thoroughness she applied to everything, including the garage, the car, and the basement. She came back to the kitchen where I was standing and said, very calmly, "Mom, I can't find my violin." I asked her where she had last had it. She thought for a moment. "The garage, last Thursday." I called Daniel at his office. Daniel called his mother. Dolores picked up on the third ring, and when Daniel explained the situation, there was a pause on the line that was about 3 seconds long. And then she said, with genuine composure, that yes, she had found a violin case in one of the boxes from our garage, had assumed it was something we no longer needed, and had sold it that past Saturday at the estate sale for its appraised value. Daniel repeated this information to me, with his hand over the phone. I looked at my daughter. Wren was standing at the kitchen counter. She was not crying, she had not cried. She had this expression that I can only describe as deeply interior, like whatever she was feeling had already moved past the surface level emotion and was being processed somewhere private and efficient. "Mom," she said. "Yeah. Can I show you something?" She picked up her phone, scrolled for 4 seconds, handed it to me. On the screen was a video. She had recorded it 2 weeks earlier, on a Sunday afternoon. In the video, she was sitting in the garage, in the corner near the shelving unit, with the violin case open in front of her. She was talking to the camera in the clear, careful voice she used when she was being precise about something. She was explaining methodically what the instrument was, where it had come from, what it had cost, and whose name was on the card inside the case. Then she said, "That violin actually belonged to me. My name is Ren Nakamura Scott, and I am 11 years old, and my mom bought this for me with money from my college fund, and here is the receipt." She held up a piece of paper toward the camera, a photocopy of the original purchase receipt, the one I kept in the filing cabinet behind the tab marked Musical Instruments. She had found it herself. She had gone into the filing cabinet, found the documentation, made a photocopy, and recorded a video of herself explaining the provenance of her own instrument to an unknown future audience 2 weeks before anyone stole it. My 11-year-old daughter had gathered evidence before the crime occurred. That was the moment I understood that something in Wren had been watching all of this for a long time, not with resentment, not with strategy, exactly in the adult sense, but with the pure observational clarity of a child who has grown up watching her mother keep documentation and stay calm and build things quietly, and who had absorbed more of that than I ever intended to teach. I pressed play on the video a second time. Then I set the phone down on the counter. I called my attorney, Julian Aucaffer, at 2:14 in the afternoon. I had retained Julian 7 months earlier, in March, for an unrelated matter involving a neighbor's fence dispute that had since resolved, and we had maintained the relationship because he was precise and calm and did not pad his hours. I told him what had happened. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "She sold personal property that didn't belong to her." "Yes, and your daughter has a video documenting ownership prior to the sale." "Yes, and you have the original purchase documentation." "Yes." He was quiet again for a moment that felt less like thinking and more like arriving at a conclusion that had been obvious from the first sentence. "Nora, this is theft, regardless of intent. She sold property she did not own." The police arrived at 11:43 in the morning. Julian Aucaffer had a habit of asking one question before he said anything else. Not a procedural question, not a clarifying question. A single, precise question that told you immediately what he believed the situation actually was, stripped of everything surrounding it. When I called him that Monday afternoon and explained what Dolores had done, his question was, "How documented is your ownership?" I told him about the purchase receipt, the insurance records, the appraisal, the card with Wren's name inside the case, and then I told him about the video. There was a pause on his end that was different from the thinking pause. It was shorter, sharper. "Your daughter recorded a provenance statement 2 weeks before the sale." "Yes." he exhaled once through his nose. "Nora, I need you to do nothing for the next 24 hours. Don't call Dolores. Don't send anything in writing. Don't discuss this with Daniel's family. Let me make one call this afternoon and I will contact you before 9 tomorrow morning." I agreed. I hung up. I went to the living room where Ren was doing her homework at the coffee table, a geography worksheet she was completing with the same focused quiet she brought to everything, and I sat on the couch nearby and watched her for a moment without saying anything. She looked up once, assessed me, and went back to her worksheet. "We're going to get it back," I told her. She nodded without looking up. No, I believed her. Julian called at 8:52 the following morning. He had spoken to a colleague who handled property crimes at the civil level, a woman named Adiz Mbeki who worked out of an office on the 15th floor of the Callaway building downtown and specialized in exactly this category of dispute: personal property transferred without authorization, with a paper trail sufficient to establish original ownership. Julian's assessment, after that consultation, was clean and direct. Under state law, selling property you do not own is conversion. It does not matter that she believed the items in those boxes were abandoned. She did not verify. She did not ask. She conducted a for-profit sale of an item belonging to your daughter. The proceeds belong to Ren, not to Dolores. What is the recovery pathway? Civil demand letter first. If she refuses or does not respond within 14 days, we file. The video and documentation make the ownership question unambiguous. A brief pause. "I would like Adiz to handle the demand letter. She has a particular way of writing them that communicates the seriousness of what follows if ignored." I asked what that cost. He gave me a number. I told him to proceed. What I did not tell Julian that morning, because it was not relevant to the immediate situation, was that the theft of the violin was not the only thing I had been thinking about since Monday. It was the most acute thing, but it was sitting inside a larger context that I had been building quietly for just under 3 years, and the violin situation had done something to that context that I needed to think through carefully before I moved on anything else. The larger context had started in February, 2 years and 9 months before Dolores sold the violin, on the evening that Dolores announced, over dinner at Camille's house, that she had decided to put the Birchwood Drive property on the market, and that she expected the family to be involved in the process, by which she meant that she expected Daniel, as the eldest son, to be her primary point of contact with the listing agent, the title company, and the estate attorney she had already retained. I want to be accurate about the sequence of events that followed because accuracy is the only thing that makes the rest of this make sense. The Birchwood Drive property was a 4-bedroom house on a corner lot in a neighborhood that had been appreciating steadily for 9 years. The mortgage had been paid off 11 years earlier. Dolores had also, over the course of the preceding 2 decades, accumulated 2 additional investment properties: a duplex on Fenmore Street that she rented to long-term tenants, and a small commercial unit on the east side that housed a dry cleaner and an alterations shop. Taken together, her real estate portfolio represented a significant amount of generational wealth, the kind that does not appear dramatically, but accumulates with the slow, patient logic of someone who bought property early in neighborhoods that the market eventually caught up to. The total value of the 3 properties, as I had come to understand it through a combination of public records and a conversation with Gordon Chu in which I laid out everything I knew, was somewhere in the range of $1.4 million. This was the number that lived quietly in the back of my mind for the 3 years that followed that dinner at Camille's house, not because I wanted it. I want to be precise about that. I did not want Dolores Nakamura's properties. I did not lie awake at night calculating percentages or drafting inheritance scenarios. What I wanted was simpler and harder to articulate. I wanted to ensure that whatever happened in this family, however the relationships shifted and settled and sometimes broke, Ren would be protected. Ren, who was Daniel's biological daughter, who was Dolores's grandchild whether Dolores acted like it or not, who had a legal and moral claim to be included in whatever the family decided about its own continuity. What I had learned over 9 years of watching Dolores operate was that Dolores had a very specific definition of family that did not include the women her sons had married. It included her children. It included, in a more conditional way, her grandchildren. But the women who had produced those grandchildren were administrative. They were logistics. They were, in Dolores's internal hierarchy, a category of person whose role was to be grateful and unobtrusive and not to ask questions about property. I had spent 9 years being unobtrusive. I had not spent 9 years being unaware. The first close call happened 14 months before the violin sale, on a Sunday afternoon in August when Dolores stopped by our house unannounced, which she did occasionally with the comfortable entitlement of a woman who had decided that calling ahead was a formality that did not apply to family. I was in the home office when she arrived. Daniel let her in, and they were in the kitchen when I came out, and the first thing I noticed was that she was carrying a folder. She set it on the kitchen table with the practiced ease of someone who had handled a great many folders. "I wanted to bring these by in person," she told Daniel. "The estate attorney needs responses from you on the property trust documents before the end of the month. It's straightforward, just signature pages." Daniel looked at the folder. "What trust documents?" "For the Birchwood transfer. We discussed this in June." She glanced toward me with the polite, empty look she reserved for my presence during conversations that were not intended for me. "It's just family inheritance planning. Standard." I leaned against the doorframe. "What's the structure of the trust?" She turned to look at me fully, which she did not always do. "It's a straightforward family trust. The properties stay in the family." A pause that lasted exactly long enough to carry meaning. "It's fairly standard for our situation." "Which attorney?" I kept my voice level, curious, not confrontational. She named someone, a name I did not recognize. "Have you worked with them before?" I asked. "For years." She picked up the folder and held it toward Daniel. "It really is straightforward, sweetheart." Daniel took the folder. He looked at me. I gave him nothing useful with my expression, which I had practiced over 9 years until it was reliable. He looked back at his mother. "I'll look it over this week." She stayed for another 40 minutes. We had coffee. She told a long story about Camille's garden renovation. I contributed 3 sentences to the conversation and spent the remaining time cataloging what she had said about the trust documents and what she had carefully not said. That evening, I called Gordon Chu. "I need the name of an estate attorney," I told him. "Someone I retain independently, not someone connected to the Nakamura family." He gave me a name. Rosalind Ferreira, whose office was on the 4th floor of a building on West Clement Street, who had 22 years of experience in estate and property law and a reputation, Gordon told me, for being extremely thorough. I made an appointment for the following Thursday. I did not tell Daniel I was going. This is the part that some people, when I tell this story, find difficult. Why didn't I tell him? The answer is that telling him would have required a conversation I was not ready to have. A conversation about what I suspected his mother was doing with those trust documents and whether Daniel's loyalty to her would override his good judgment. I did not know the answer to that question, and I needed to know what I was looking at before I introduced any of it into my marriage. I loved Daniel. I trusted Daniel. I was not yet certain that Daniel could see his mother clearly enough to be useful on this particular subject. Rosalind Ferreira had gray hair pulled back in a low knot and the kind of desk that had nothing unnecessary on it. She listened to everything I told her without interrupting. When I finished, she asked 2 questions, both precise, both revealing that she had understood immediately what the situation was. Then she told me that the most useful thing I could do in the immediate term was request a copy of whatever documents Dolores's attorney had prepared, review them independently, and understand what the proposed trust structure actually said before Daniel signed anything. "What are you concerned about specifically?" she asked. "I'm concerned that the trust is written in a way that clarifies inheritance lines to exclude spouses and prioritize biological Nakamura descendants in a manner that affects my daughter's position." Rosalind looked at me steadily. "Your daughter is a biological Nakamura descendant. I know, but I'm not." A silence that was less a pause and more an understanding. "And you want to know what that means for the property distribution if there is ever a divorce or a death or a dispute?" "I want to know what it means before my husband signs anything," I told her. She nodded once. "That's the correct instinct." I retained Rosalind Ferreira that afternoon for an initial review. The retainer was $4,000. I paid it from a separate account I had maintained since the 3rd year of my marriage, an account in my name only, at a bank that was not the one Daniel and I shared, into which I transferred a modest amount every month with the regularity of someone paying a utility bill. The account had grown without drama over 6 years to a total that I will not specify here because the amount itself is not the point. The point is that I had built something that was mine, not out of secrecy for its own sake, not out of distrust of Daniel, but out of a clear-eyed understanding that a woman who has nothing of her own is a woman who has no options, and I was not interested in having no options. The second close call happened 6 months later, in February, at the birthday lunch Camille organized every year for Dolores at a restaurant on the north end of downtown called Barranca, which had leather booths and very good bread and a noise level that made certain conversations easier to have without being overheard. There were 11 of us at the table. Ren was there, sitting between Daniel and Theo, working through a bowl of pasta with the focused attention she brought to most things. Camille was the one who brought it up, not Dolores. I think Camille did not realize it would be a close call. I think she was simply curious. "Nora, what is it you're doing now? Someone told me you were consulting." The table's attention shifted toward me in the way that happens when a room full of people who have not been paying attention to you suddenly do. Dolores's gaze moved from her bread plate to my face with an unhurried curiosity that contained a very old assumption, that whatever I answered would be unremarkable. "Some project work," I told Camille. "Property analysis mostly, nothing dramatic." "For whom?" Dolores's voice carried the warm, interested tone she used when she was asking a question she expected to find boring. "A few different clients." I reached for my water glass. "It's flexible, which works well with Ren's schedule." Across the table, Theo was helping Ren open a sugar packet she was struggling with. Neither of them was listening to this conversation. Dolores tilted her head slightly. "So it's freelance, like consulting." "More or less." She smiled at me with the warmth of someone who has just had their assumption confirmed. "That's smart for this stage. Flexible work while she's still young." The implication was architectural and precise. This is a phase, a placeholder, a sensible choice for a woman whose real function was domestic. I smiled back. "It works for us." What I did not say, because Rosalind had advised me 2 months earlier that the less the Nakamura family knew about my professional activity before a certain document was filed, the cleaner everything would be, was that the property analysis work I was describing was not freelance consulting. It was the 3rd year of a structured arrangement I had built with a commercial property investment group, whose managing partner, a methodical man named Brennan Kwok, had brought me in initially on a contract basis, and had, over the preceding 18 months, restructured our arrangement into something with more permanence and more upside. The work had grown past what I had originally planned. The income had grown past what I had originally projected. And the professional standing I had quietly built in a field adjacent to real estate, close enough to understand everything Dolores had accumulated over 40 years, had put me in a position that would have significantly revised Dolores's estimate of what I was. None of that left my mouth at the birthday lunch. I ate my food and kept my expression pleasant and let Dolores believe what she wanted to believe, and that night I sent Brennan Kwok an email confirming a call for the following Monday about the next phase of the arrangement we had been discussing. He responded in 11 minutes. "Monday works. Good news on the Hartley evaluation. Let's talk." I closed my laptop. I went to check on Ren, who was already asleep with her left hand curled under her cheek the way she had slept since she was an infant. I stood in her doorway for a moment. Then I went back downstairs and made myself a cup of tea and thought about the birthday lunch and what Dolores's face had looked like when she said the word freelance, the small, satisfied compression of her expression that meant she had filed me correctly in the place she had always kept me. Let her file, I thought. Let her be comfortable in what she believes. The third close call was the one that almost went wrong. It happened 3 months before the violin sale, on an evening in July when Daniel came home from his office with a look that I had learned to read over 9 years of marriage. Something had been said to him, and he was working out how to bring it to me, and the thing that had been said had enough weight that he did not want to get it wrong. He waited until Ren was in bed. He sat across from me at the kitchen table and set his phone down between us, screen down. "My mother asked me something today." Waited. She asked if we had a separate account. His voice was careful, the voice he used when he was reporting something he personally found uncomfortable. She said Camille mentioned something about a bank statement she saw on the counter when she stopped by last spring, from a bank we don't use together. Camille had been at our house in April to drop off a birthday gift for Ren. She had been in our kitchen for approximately 12 minutes. Apparently 12 minutes was enough. I looked at Daniel. His face was open, not accusing. He was asking because he wanted to understand, not because he had already decided something. That distinction mattered enormously. I have an account in my name, I told him. I've had it since before we were married. I use it for professional expenses and a personal reserve. He absorbed this. How much is in it? Enough that it's worth having. A pause. Daniel, you have a retirement account I don't have joint access to. You have professional memberships I don't contribute to. We have always had some financial separation. This isn't different. He sat with that for a moment. My mother seemed to think it was unusual. Your mother thinks a lot of things are unusual when they involve me having something she doesn't know about. I kept my tone even, not harsh. This was not a moment for harshness. Do you think it's unusual? He looked at me. Something in his face settled. No, he said finally. No, I don't. I nodded once. Then that's what matters. We did not discuss it again. But that night, after Daniel went upstairs, I sat at the kitchen table for a while longer and thought carefully about the fact that Camille had seen the bank statement and had told Dolores, and that Dolores had asked Daniel about it. Not asked me, asked Daniel. As though the correct way to investigate my finances was to go through my husband. I went to the home office. I opened my laptop. I sent Rosalind Ferreira a message. I would like to accelerate the timeline on the filing we discussed. Can we meet next week? She responded the following morning. Thursday at 10. I have been ready for 2 months. Whenever you are. The filing she was referring to was not related to the violin. The violin had not happened yet. The filing was something I had asked Rosalind to prepare quietly over the preceding 8 months. A legal instrument that established certain things about my professional earnings, my personal assets, and a specific property interest I had acquired through the arrangement with Brennan Kwok, documented in a way that would be impossible to overlook in any future proceeding involving the Nakamura family's estate planning. It was not aggressive. It was not retaliatory. It was simply a record, accurate and complete, of what I had built and what it was worth and whose name was on it. Rosalind and I met on a Thursday morning in late June. She had the documents ready. I reviewed them across the table from her, taking my time while she drank her coffee and did not rush me. When I finished, I looked up. Everything here is accurate, I asked. Everything there is accurate, complete, and filed with the county recorder's office as of yesterday afternoon. She set her cup down. For the record, Nora, I have handled estate matters for 31 years. The preparation in this file is among the most thorough I have seen from someone who is not themselves an attorney. I thanked her. I meant it. I drove home from Rosalind's office and stopped at the school to pick up Wren from orchestra rehearsal. She came out of the building carrying her violin case in both hands, the dark brown hardshell case, the one with her name on the card inside. She climbed into the passenger seat and put the case carefully across her knees the way she always did. She was 11 years old and she smelled like the school gymnasium, and her hair was coming out of its braid. How was rehearsal? I asked. Florin says I'm ready to move up a level. She buckled her seatbelt without putting the case down. He wants to talk to you about a different teacher, someone better. I pulled out of the school lot. How do you feel about that? She considered this with her characteristic seriousness, looking out the windshield at the afternoon traffic. Good. Florin is great, but I want to see how good I can actually get. I looked at her for a moment while we were stopped at the light. I want to see that too, I told her. She nodded, satisfied, and spent the rest of the drive home explaining the technical distinctions between the 2 Bartok pieces she had been assigned, in the precise, unhurried way of someone who had thought about it thoroughly and was simply reporting conclusions. 6 weeks later, on a Tuesday in August, I was sitting alone in the house after Wren left for school when something made me go to the garage. Not a specific reason. A habit I had developed over the years of doing a walkthrough when things felt unsettled. I checked the garage the way I checked everything, methodically, starting at the left wall and moving right, the shelving unit, the boxes we had reorganized in the spring. The corner where Wren sometimes left her case when she came in from the car and her hands were full. The corner was empty. I stood there for a moment in the garage, in the particular morning quiet of a house where everyone has just left, and understood that the case was not there. Then I went back inside and thought through the last week, where Wren had been, whether she had moved it, whether I had seen it recently. I had not seen it recently. I did not call Dolores. I did not call Daniel. I went to the home office and sat down at my desk and opened the filing cabinet, and I checked behind the tab marked musical instruments. and the purchase receipt and insurance documentation were exactly where I had put them. I made a photocopy of both. I put the copies in a separate folder and placed that folder in my bag. Then I waited. I waited because I was not certain yet, because Ren might have moved the case. Because sometimes things are misplaced and the correct response to uncertainty is to gather more information before you act. I had practiced this particular patience for 9 years and I was very good at it. When Ren came home from school that afternoon, I asked her, casually, if she knew where her violin was. She frowned, thought about it. Garage, I left it there Thursday when my hands were full. Why? Just checking, I told her. I went back to the garage, looked again. Thoroughly. Every corner, every shelf. It was not there. I did not panic. I had spent 9 years not panicking, and that practice had made a particular kind of calm available to me that felt less like composure and more like a very quiet, very cold clarity. I went to the home office again. I sat down. I thought about the boxes from the spring. I thought about Dolores's estate sale, which I had been aware of, which I had noted and filed and not thought about further because I had not known there was anything to think about further. And then I knew. I did not call anyone that evening. I fed Ren dinner, helped her with a math worksheet, watched 40 minutes of a nature documentary with her on the couch, and put her to bed. Then I went to the home office and drafted a careful, specific, factual summary of what I believed had happened and what documentation existed to support that belief. I sent it to Julian Ackhafer at 10:47 at night with a subject line that read, "Potential property conversion, need to speak tomorrow." He called me at 8:15 the following morning. 2 days later, Adiz Mbiki's demand letter arrived at Dolores Nakamura's front door via certified mail, and on that same afternoon, without any of us knowing it yet, Ren came home from school, went to the kitchen counter, picked up her phone, scrolled for 4 seconds, and handed it to me. Everything I had built across 9 years of careful, quiet, precise preparation was about to walk through Dolores Nakamura's front door in the form of a certified letter, a recorded video, and a property filing that no one in that family had any idea existed. I want to know if you would have said what I said next, because I still think about it. Adiz Mbiki's demand letter arrived at Dolores Nakamura's house on a Wednesday morning. I know this because Adiz used certified mail, and the tracking confirmation landed in my email at 10:22 that morning while I was sitting at my desk reviewing a property evaluation for Brennan Kwok. I looked at the confirmation for a moment. Then I went back to the evaluation. Daniel did not know about the letter. This was the part I had known would be the most difficult. Not the filing, not the legal process, not the confrontation with Dolores, but the conversation I was going to need to have with my husband about the sequence of events I had set in motion without telling him first. I had thought about this conversation for several weeks, and I had not yet resolved exactly how it would go, because the answer depended on something I could not fully predict. How much of what Dolores had done Daniel was prepared to see clearly. He called me at 11:47. My mother got a letter from an attorney. His voice had the particular quality of someone who is working very hard to stay calm. "Nora." "What is this?" "It's a demand letter for the return of the violin or its appraised value." A silence that lasted about 4 seconds. "You hired an attorney." "I retained Julian months ago for another matter. He connected me with Adiz Mbiki, who specializes in property conversion. Daniel, your mother sold our daughter's instrument, a $3,400 instrument. She sold it without asking and kept the money. She didn't know it was Ren's. She didn't verify. She had a box from our garage and she opened it and she found an instrument case and she priced it and sold it. She had 14 days of estate sale preparation during which she could have called us. She didn't." Another silence, shorter this time. "She's very upset." I set my pen down. "I imagine she is. Adiz's letters have that effect." "Nora," his voice dropped slightly, "can we talk about this before it goes further?" "Of course, come home for lunch." He came home at 12:30. We sat at the kitchen table, the same table where I had told him about the separate bank account, where we had made most of the significant decisions of our marriage. He had printed the demand letter. He set it between us. I let him talk first. He laid out Dolores's position with the careful fairness he brought to everything. She had not known, she had acted in good faith, she was embarrassed, she was willing to discuss resolution. He said all of this with the measured delivery of a structural engineer presenting load calculations, and when he finished, I understood that he was not defending her exactly. He was asking me to hear her before I leveled her. Daniel, I told him. I have heard her for 9 years. What I need you to hear right now is this. Your daughter has not touched her violin in 2 weeks. She has not played a single note. She practices every day and she has not played since the day she found out it was gone. That is what your mother did. He looked at the letter. Something in his face shifted in the particular way it did when the structural load exceeded the estimate. What does Adiz need from me? Nothing right now. The letter gives Dolores 14 days to respond. I want to see what she does. He nodded. He folded the letter. He put it in his jacket pocket. Then he looked at me with an expression that was not quite apology and not quite determination, but something that lived between them. I'm on your side, Nora. I know, I told him. I've always known that. What I did not tell him was that the demand letter was not the only document that had been prepared. While Adiz had been drafting the violin demand, Rosalind Ferreira had spent the preceding 3 weeks finalizing something that was considerably larger and considerably more permanent, a legal instrument that I had asked her to hold until I gave her the signal to file. The violin situation had clarified the signal. The Nakamura family's estate planning, the trust documents, the Birchwood sale, the way Dolores had asked Daniel about my separate account rather than asking me directly, all of it had been building toward a moment where I needed something on record that established, unambiguously, what I had built and what it was worth and what relationship it had to the Nakamura family's assets. Rosalind had been ready for 2 months. The violin pushed me past ready. I called her at 2:15 that afternoon. File everything, I told her. Original timeline. Her response was brief and exact. It will be recorded by end of business Friday. I sat with that for a moment. Then I called Adiz and told her that if Dolores did not respond to the demand letter within 7 days, I wanted to proceed rather than wait the full 14. You're accelerating, Adiz observed. I'm done waiting for people to do the right thing voluntarily. She paused. Is there something else in motion I should know about? Not in your lane, but the picture is larger than the violin. Understood. A brief silence. For what it's worth, Nora, the video your daughter recorded is one of the cleanest pieces of ownership documentation I have seen. Whatever else happens, that instrument is coming back. I thanked her. I hung up. I went to find Ren. She was in the living room doing what she had been doing every evening since the violin disappeared, sitting in the chair by the window, not reading, not watching anything, just sitting. She had a book in her lap, but it was closed. She was looking at the space near the door where she usually left the case when she came in. I sat on the couch across from her. Ren, she looked at me. It's moving, I told her. We're getting it back. She nodded slowly. Then she said, in the careful voice she used when she was working through something complicated, Grandma didn't know it was mine, right? She just thought it was a random thing. I looked at my daughter. She was 11 years old and she was trying to build a generous interpretation of what had happened to her. She should have asked, I told her. Before she sold anything from those boxes, she should have asked. Ren considered this. Yeah, she said finally. She should have. She picked up her book and opened it. The conversation was over as far as she was concerned. She had assigned it a category and moved on. I sat there a moment longer watching her. This particular child who had quietly recorded a provenance statement for her own property at the age of 11, who had handed me her phone without drama and watched me understand what she had done, who was now reading a book in the chair by the window with the same composure she brought to everything. I thought about Dolores's face at Camille's birthday lunch, the small, satisfied compression when she said the word freelance. I thought about 9 years of dinners and toasts and furniture assessments and Thanksgiving tables where I was present the way furniture is present, occupying space without contributing meaning. I thought about the trust documents in the folder Dolores had brought to our kitchen table and the assumption underneath them, the assumption that had driven every decision she had made about me since the first dinner where she introduced me as the girl Daniel had been seeing. The assumption was simple. I was temporary. Not in the sense that she expected our marriage to end, but in the deeper sense that she had decided I was the kind of woman whose presence does not accumulate consequence, who could be managed, whose response to any given situation would be moderated by the need to keep the peace, preserve the relationship, avoid making things difficult. She had been working from that assumption for 9 years. On Friday morning, Rosalind Ferreira's filing was recorded with the county recorder's office. That afternoon, Dolores Nakamura called Daniel and told him she wanted everyone to come to the Birchwood Drive house on Sunday for a family meeting about the situation. by which she meant the demand letter, and that she expected it to be resolved like family, in person, without attorneys. Daniel told her he would ask me. He came to the home office where I was working and stood in the doorway. She wants a family meeting Sunday, at her house, no attorneys. I saved the document I was working on. Fine. He looked at me. He was a structural engineer. He knew what things looked like when they were load-bearing. Nora, what are you walking into that house with? I looked at him. Everything. He was quiet for a moment. Should I be worried? About me? No. I turned back to my screen. Tell her Sunday works. The drive to Birchwood Drive took 18 minutes. Daniel drove. Wren sat in the backseat with her book, which Dolores had specified she was welcome to bring, because Dolores had framed the meeting as a family gathering that would include the grandchildren, a framing that I understood immediately as strategic. Children at the table made everything harder to escalate. Dolores had managed rooms for 40 years. She knew what she was doing. Camille's car was already in the driveway. Theo's truck was parked at the curb. Inside the house, I could hear voices before we reached the door. Dolores opened the door herself. She was wearing a good blouse and her best composed expression, the one that was warm without being soft, the expression of a woman who intends to control the room and has already decided how. She kissed Daniel's cheek. She bent toward Wren with genuine tenderness. This was the humanizing thing about Dolores, the thing that made her impossible to categorize simply. She did love her grandchildren in her way, in the possessive, conditional way of someone for whom love and ownership were adjacent concepts. She touched Wren's face with one hand and said, "There's lemonade in the kitchen, sweetheart." To me, she offered a smile and a step backward that was technically welcoming. We went inside. The living room had been arranged with the particular deliberateness of someone who has thought about seating. Camille was on the sofa with her husband, Niles, a quiet accountant who had perfected the art of being present without being involved. Theo was in the armchair near the window, forward in his seat the way he always was, not performing comfort. A tray of coffee and lemonade sat on the low table. Wren took her lemonade and settled into the corner of the room with her book near Theo, who gave her a small nod of acknowledgement. She opened to her page. Dolores sat across from me. Daniel sat beside me. The architecture of the room made it a conversation between Dolores and whoever was directly across from her, and I had chosen my seat knowing that. She opened with the warmth she had prepared. "I think we all want the same thing here," Dolores began, her hands folded in her lap. "We want to resolve this as a family, without any of us doing something we can't undo." She looked at me with an expression that was, technically, an olive branch. "Nora, I understand you're upset. I want you to know that was never my intention." I looked at her. "I know it wasn't intentional, Dolores." She blinked. She had expected something harder, and the agreement had thrown her half a step off the rhythm she had prepared. "Then I'm glad we can start there." She glanced toward Daniel, a quick check. "What I'd like to discuss is the letter. I think the attorney was a big step for what is essentially a family misunderstanding. What would you like to discuss about it specifically?" She unfolded her hands and refolded them. "I'd like to discuss whether it's necessary. The sale was an honest mistake. I didn't know the violin was Wren's. The boxes from your garage, I assumed they were items you decided you didn't need. I would have asked." A slight pause. "I should have asked." The last sentence was the closest thing to an apology she was going to offer voluntarily. I noted it and did not respond to it. "How much of the proceeds are you prepared to return?" I asked. Camille shifted on the sofa. Niles looked at the coffee tray. Dolores's expression adjusted almost imperceptibly. "I thought we might discuss a different kind of resolution. Rather than a financial transfer, perhaps I could contribute something toward a replacement instrument." "Something meaningful." "Wren's instrument was appraised at $3,400. Are you proposing to cover that amount?" "I'm proposing we find something that works for everyone." Her voice carried the practiced reasonableness of someone who has concluded many negotiations on her own terms. "A gift rather than a payment. Family rather than attorneys." I was quiet for a moment. Around the room, the specific quality of the silence changed. Theo had stopped looking at Wren's book. Camille had stopped looking at anything in particular. "Dolores," I said, "I want to show you something." I opened the bag I had set beside my chair and took out a folder. Inside was a printed copy of a D's demand letter, which she had already seen. Underneath, it was a printed copy of the tracking confirmation showing certified delivery. Underneath, that was a copy of the original purchase receipt for the violin, and beneath that was a printed still from Wren's video. a single frame showing Wren holding the receipt toward the camera with her name clearly visible on the card inside the open case. I laid them on the table in a row, left to right, the way you would present evidence that has an order. Dolores looked at them. Her expression did not break. But her eyes moved across the 4 documents with a precision that told me she understood immediately what she was looking at. "This is the purchase documentation," I told her. "The receipt, the insurance record, and a still from the video my daughter recorded 2 weeks before your estate sale, establishing her ownership of the instrument." Dolores looked up from the documents. I'm aware of what she did with the video. Something in her voice had shifted from warm reasonableness to a register I had heard before, the register she used when she was managing something she found distasteful. "Nora, a child recording herself in a garage is not a legal document." "No," I agreed. "But the purchase receipt is, the insurance record is, and the video corroborates the ownership claim in a way that would be difficult to contest in a filing, which is the next step if we don't resolve this today." "You're threatening me?" She said it quietly, almost reflectively, as if she was categorizing it. "I'm describing the process." Camille leaned forward slightly. "Mom," just the one word, carefully placed. Dolores did not look at her. She kept her eyes on me with the focused attention she had never previously directed at me as a primary subject, only as a peripheral one. I had her full attention now. It felt different than I had expected. Not satisfying yet. Not complete. We were still in the first layer. "What is it you actually want, Nora?" The warmth was gone. What replaced it was the direct, transactional tone of someone who has been in enough negotiations to know that you eventually get to the number. "The $3,400. Fine. Write a check today. Is that what this is about?" "That's part of it." The shift that followed was subtle and complete. She heard the part of it and understood that there was more coming, and for the first time in 9 years of Sunday dinners and birthday lunches and estate sale conversations and toast after toast that did not include my name, Dolores Nakamura looked at me as though she might have made an error of categorization. "What else?" The 2 words were flat. Daniel, beside me, was very still. He had known something was coming. He had not known what. This was the part where I was going to need him to stay beside me, not in front of me, not behind me, and I had spent the preceding 3 days trusting that he would. "The demand letter addresses the violin," I told her. "There's a second matter that's separate from the violin entirely." Camille's husband, Niles, set his coffee cup down. It was the most expressive thing he had done since we arrived. "The trust documents you brought to our house 14 months ago," I said. "The ones from your estate attorney. Daniel reviewed them, but I also had them reviewed independently. By Rosalind Ferreira. Do you know her?" Dolores's expression gave me nothing useful. "I don't. She's an estate attorney. 22 years of practice. She reviewed the trust structure you proposed and identified several provisions that would, in the event of Daniel's death or the dissolution of our marriage, significantly limit Wren's share of the estate relative to Camille and Theo's children, despite Wren being an equal biological grandchild." The room was different now. Not silent, there were still ambient sounds, Wren turning a page, the refrigerator running in the kitchen, but the quality of attention had changed entirely. Theo had put both feet on the floor. Camille had folded her hands in her lap in a way that looked like she was holding something. "That trust," Dolores said carefully, "was written to keep the property within the Nakamura bloodline. Wren is a Nakamura by blood. The provisions relate to named descendants through specific..." "Dolores," I kept my voice even. "Wren's last name is Nakamura Scott. She is Daniel's biological daughter. Any estate instrument that treats her differently than Camille's children or Theo's children on the basis of her mother's background or the structure of her parents' marriage is something I intend to contest. Rosalind has already reviewed the grounds. If you are still here, hit like. I need to know you saw that." Camille unfolded her hands. She looked at her mother with an expression I had never seen on her face before. Not the habitual look away, not the polite deflection, but a direct, measuring look that told me she had known something about those trust documents and had not told me, and was now accounting for that decision. Dolores straightened in her chair. "You don't understand what that trust is designed to do." "I understand it very precisely. Rosalind is very thorough. It's protecting the family's assets from..." She stopped. The sentence had a completion that she understood now in this room, with Wren sitting 12 feet away with her book, that she could not say out loud. "From me," I said quietly. "That's the end of that sentence. You can say it." The silence this time was different. It had weight. Niles stood up. He said he was going to get more coffee. No one responded to him. He went to the kitchen anyway. I understood why. Niles had been in that room for 9 years of family negotiations and had survived them by removing himself from any moment where his presence might require him to have a position. He was not a bad man. He was an extremely skilled bystander. Theo was not moving. He was looking at his mother with the open, uncomfortable face of someone who is hearing something confirmed that he had suspected and had chosen not to examine. Theo's not examining had been, until this moment, a survivable choice. I watched him understand that it was no longer. "Mom," Theo said. "Did you write Ren out of the trust?" Dolores turned to her younger son. "I wrote the trust to protect the property. What happens to it after I'm gone is a family matter and I am entitled to. She's 11. Theo's voice was not loud. It was the opposite of loud. "She's 11 and she plays violin and she's right there." He did not gesture toward Ren. He did not need to. "Did you write her out?" Dolores pressed her lips together. The answer was in the pressing. Theo turned to look at me. His face had the particular quality of a person who has decided in real time to stop standing in the place they have been standing. "Nora, I'm sorry, I didn't know it went that far." "I know you didn't," I told him. I meant it. Camille's hands were back in her lap. She was looking at the coffee tray. When she finally spoke, her voice was lower than usual, carefully controlled, the voice of someone measuring every word before it leaves. "The violin and the trust are two different things, Mom. You need to separate them." "They are separate," Dolores said. "They're not," Camille told her. And the fact that Camille was the one saying it, the child who had always maintained Dolores's preferred version of events, who had reported my bank statement, who had looked away at dinner tables for 9 years, the fact that it was Camille saying it made the room understand that something structural had shifted. Dolores looked at her daughter. Something crossed her face that I had not seen before, not anger, not calculation. Something older and more complicated, the look of a woman who has managed a family for 40 years and is finding, for the first time, that the management is not holding. She turned back to me. "What is it you want, specifically?" "The full appraised value of the violin, $3,400, returned within 7 days by check to my account. And the trust." "Rosalind has already filed a formal objection to the provisions affecting Ren. That process will proceed regardless of what happens today, but it will proceed more slowly and more quietly if we can establish that this family is capable of correcting its mistakes without requiring a judge to do it." Dolores was quiet. She was looking at me with the full, focused attention of someone who has been forced to revise a very old assessment and is not enjoying the revision. I had sat at her table for 9 years as a footnote. I was not a footnote now. I had never been a footnote. I had simply been waiting for the correct moment to demonstrate that clearly enough that it could not be walked back. "There's something else," I said. Camille made a small sound that was not quite a word. "The filing Rosalind submitted on Friday," I continued. "It isn't only the trust objection. It also includes documentation of the professional and financial standing I've built independently over the past several years, filed with the county recorder's office as a formal asset record. It exists now as a public document. The purpose of that filing is to establish, in the clearest possible legal terms, that I am not a woman without resources, without standing, or without options." I looked at Dolores steadily. "I want you to understand that clearly, not to threaten you, but because I think you have been operating for 9 years on an assumption about what I am, and I would like that assumption to be corrected." The room was entirely still. Dolores looked at me for a long time. The expression on her face moved through several things I did not have exact names for. At the end of that movement, what was left was something I had not expected. Not defeat, not rage, but a kind of exhausted reckoning. The look of a woman who is very good at her work and has just encountered evidence that someone else has been doing equivalent work in an adjacent field, quietly, for years without her awareness. From across the room, Ren turned a page. None of us looked at her, but we all knew she was there. Dolores looked down at the 4 documents still arranged on the table in front of her. The purchase receipt, the insurance record, the tracking confirmation, the still from the video. She looked at them for a long moment, and then she looked up at me, and what she said next was the last thing I had expected her to say. She did what I would have done. Her voice was quieter than it had been. "Your daughter, recording herself. That's exactly what I would have done." I did not respond immediately, because the thing she had said was true, and it had arrived with the particular force of something that was both an acknowledgement and a grief. I had one more thing to say. She had not intended it as a compliment. I understood that. It was an observation, the kind that escapes a person when they have stopped performing and are simply reacting, and what it told me was that somewhere beneath the 40 years of property management and controlled warmth and careful family architecture, Dolores Nakamura had recognized something in her granddaughter that she had never been willing to recognize in me. The preparation, the documentation, the refusal to be caught without evidence. She was right that Wren had done what she would have done. She was wrong that it had nothing to do with me. I reached back into the folder. There was one more document underneath the 4 I had already laid on the table, and I had saved it deliberately, not for drama, but because it was the document that made everything else make sense, the one that answered the question Dolores had been asking in her own way for 9 years, the question underneath every estate sale price and toast omission and trust provision. Who, exactly, do you think you are? I placed it on the table. It was a printed copy of the county recorder's filing. Rosalind Ferreira's work, clean and precise, and recorded as of the previous Friday. It documented the property interest I had acquired through the arrangement with Brennan Kwok, a fractional ownership stake in a commercial property on the north end of the Harwell district that had been appraised the preceding spring at $2.1 million. My share, established through the investment agreement and recorded formally in my name, Nora Scott, represented a documented asset value of $340,000. I watched Dolores look at the number. She looked at it for a long time. Long enough that Camille leaned slightly forward to see what her mother was looking at. Long enough that Theo, from across the room, made a small sound that was not quite a word. Long enough that the document stopped being a piece of paper and became something structural, the way load-bearing walls become visible when you remove the drywall around them. Dolores looked up at me. The expression on her face had completed its journey through all the intermediate stages and arrived somewhere I had not seen before, somewhere that was not the managed warmth or the focused authority or the exhausted reckoning of 20 minutes ago. What was left was simpler and harder to look at directly. It was the expression of a woman who understood, for the first time, the specific nature of the mistake she had made. Not the violin, not the trust provisions, the foundational mistake. The one she had been making for 9 years. She had looked at me and seen someone without consequence. $340,000, she said. Her voice was flat, not accusatory, not wounded. Flat the way a structural assessment is flat when the numbers do not support the original design. Recorded Friday, I confirmed. Camille set both hands flat on the sofa cushion beside her, not gripping, just placed there like she needed to feel something solid. This is on top of your individual income, Dolores said. It was not quite a question. My professional arrangement with Brennan Kwok's group has been in place for 3 years. The property stake came in the 2nd year. It's been growing. Dolores was quiet for a moment. Then, with the directness of someone who has nothing left to manage, what does your annual income look like? Niles had come back from the kitchen at some point. He was standing near the doorway. I did not look at him. That's not a conversation I'm having today, Dolores. What we're having today is a conversation about a $3,400 violin and a trust document that needs revision. Nora, her voice had lost its authority register entirely. What was underneath it was not weakness, exactly. It was something more like age. Why didn't you tell us? The question was genuine. I heard the genuine in it, and I gave it the honest answer it deserved. Because you had already decided what I was, I told her. Before you ever knew me, you decided I was the girl Daniel had been seeing, and every time I showed you something different, you found a way to file it somewhere that didn't require you to revise. I stopped trying to show you things. I started building them instead. She absorbed this. Something in her face moved. Not breaking, not crumbling, something quieter than that. The specific adjustment of a person whose internal accounting has just been corrected after a very long time of running on the wrong figures. Theo stood up from his chair. He crossed the room and sat down on the arm of the sofa near Camille, not performing family unity, just placing himself where he meant to be. So what happens now, he said, not to me, to the room. Rosalind Ferreira had prepared a summary document as well, a 1-page overview of the trust objection and the specific provisions she intended to contest on Wren's behalf. I had not planned to use it today. But the room had arrived at a place where it was more useful than it would have been an hour ago when Dolores was still managing. I took it out and placed it in front of her. Rosalind's filing identifies 3 provisions in your current trust structure that do not treat Wren equitably as a biological grandchild, I told her. She has outlined the grounds for objection. The process will proceed unless those provisions are revised. I paused. She is prepared to work with your attorney to reach a structure that is equitable. That is her preference. That has always been her preference. Dolores looked at the summary. She did not pick it up. She looked at it from where she sat, at the specific lines Rosalind had identified, and I watched her read them with the attention of a woman who understood legal language and could not now pretend she didn't. My attorney wrote those provisions at my direction, she said finally. I know. I was trying to protect what took 40 years to build. I know that too. I kept my voice even, not cold, even. Wren is what took 11 years to build. She deserves the same protection. The room held that. Camille was the one who spoke. Her voice was controlled and deliberate, the voice of someone making a decision they have been approaching for a while and have finally reached. Mom, you need to call your attorney tomorrow and ask him to work with Rosalind Ferreira on a revised structure. That's what needs to happen. Dolores looked at her daughter. Something passed between them that I was not entirely a part of, some old accounting of their own that had been running alongside everything else in this room for years. Camille held her mother's look without looking away, which was, I understood, not a small thing. Dolores turned back to me. The violin money, she said. I'll have the check to you by Wednesday. 7 days from the demand letter date, I confirmed, which is Tuesday. A pause. Tuesday. Thank you. She looked at the recorder's filing still on the table, then at the summary document, then at me. The trust revision will take time. Rosalind is not in a hurry. She is in a process. Dolores nodded once. A slow, considered nod, the nod of a woman who has spent 40 years controlling access to things and is arriving, late and under protest, at the understanding that she has been trying to control access to something that was never hers to control. From the corner of the room, unhurried and without looking up from her book, Wren said, "Can we get lunch after this? I'm kind of hungry." The specific simplicity of that sentence did something to the room that nothing I had said in the preceding hour had done. Theo made a sound that was almost a laugh, not unkind. The involuntary release of someone who has been holding something difficult and has just been reminded that in the middle of all of it there is an 11-year-old who has been reading her book and would like lunch. Daniel, who had sat beside me for the entire confrontation without saying a single word, put his hand over mine on the armrest. He did not say anything. He did not need to. I looked at my daughter. Yeah, I told her. We can get lunch. We left the Birchwood Drive house at 12:58 in the afternoon. Wren got in the back seat and put her seatbelt on and told us she wanted the noodle place on Garfield Street. Daniel drove. I sat in the passenger seat with my bag in my lap and watched the Birchwood neighborhood pass outside the window, the corner lot, the old oak on the property line, the driveway where Camille's car was still parked. My hands had stopped being tense somewhere during the drive. I had been holding my breath through most of the preceding hour without fully realizing it. I let it out slowly, all the way you breathe out after carrying something heavy for a long time and finally setting it down somewhere permanent. I did not feel victorious. I want to be accurate about that. What I felt was finished. Specifically, completely, irreversibly finished with a version of my life in which I was a footnote in someone else's family narrative. That version was over. It had a recorded filing date and a demand letter and a summary document and a check that would arrive by Tuesday, and it was over. The check arrived on Monday. Dolores had it hand-delivered by a courier service, which told me something about how she had processed the preceding 48 hours. $3,400 made out to Wren Nakamura Scott. I deposited it the same day into Wren's college fund account, which had grown to $67,000 by that point, and which Wren would not have access to for another 7 years. When the trustee provisions I had established with Gordon Chu would allow for a structured distribution toward higher education. The police, who had arrived at Dolores's house that Tuesday morning before any of this had played out in the living room on Sunday, had done what Julian told me they would do: taken a report, reviewed Adie's documentation, and classified the incident as civil rather than criminal on the basis that Dolores had not acted with demonstrated intent to deprive Wren of the property. Julian had anticipated this outcome. The civil demand letter was always the correct instrument. The police report existed as a record, and its existence had been, in Julian's assessment, One of the reasons Dolores came to Sunday's meeting prepared to resolve rather than resist. A police report changes the texture of a family dispute in ways that are difficult to ignore. Adiz Mbeki closed the matter formally 3 weeks after the check cleared. She sent me a one-line email. File closed. Well done. Rosalind Ferreira's process with Dolores's attorney took 4 months. The revised trust structure that emerged from those 4 months named Ren as an equal beneficiary alongside the children of Camille and Theo, with provisions identical in structure and value. Rosalind reviewed the final document twice before she called me. "It's clean," she told me. "Everything Ren is entitled to is in there. I would sign this." I told her to proceed. Dolores did not fight the revision. I do not know exactly why. I have my theories. The most likely one is that seeing the county recorder's filing had done something to her foundational assessment of the situation that the demand letter alone could not have done. It is one thing to dismiss someone you have categorized as without resources. It is another to revise that category in the presence of a recorded document and then continue the behavior that the category had been justifying. Dolores was not a stupid woman. She was a woman who had been operating on wrong information for 9 years, and when the information was corrected, she adjusted. Slowly, without grace, and under considerable pressure. But she adjusted. The Birchwood Drive house sold in February. Dolores moved to a 2-bedroom condominium on the east side, near Camille, a decision she made on her own timeline and announced at a family dinner that Daniel and I attended with Ren. It was the first family dinner since the Sunday meeting. Ren sat next to Theo and told him about the new teacher Florin had connected us with, a woman named Dr. Ifoma Sar, who taught at the conservatory on the west end of the city and had agreed to take Ren on as a student starting in January. Theo listened with genuine attention and asked questions that showed he had been paying attention to Ren's playing for longer than he had ever let on. Ren got her violin back in November. The buyer, the collector from the west side of the city, was located through the estate sale records, which Adiz had subpoenaed as part of the civil process. His name was Harlan Price, and he had purchased the instrument in good faith and had no legal obligation to return it. What he had was a phone call from Adiz explaining the situation and a subsequent conversation with Julian, and what emerged from those conversations was an offer. He would return the instrument for its original sale price, $3,400, which Dolores's check had already covered. He drove it to our house on a Saturday morning in November and handed the case to Ren himself, who took it with both hands and said thank you in the direct, serious way she said most things. He told her she played beautifully. He had looked her up after the situation came to his attention. He had found a video of her playing from a recital the preceding spring. She thanked him again. She was already opening the case before he reached his car. She checked the card with her name on it first. Satisfied it was still there, she lifted the instrument out and stood in the doorway and played 4 bars of the bardock she had been learning with Dr. Sar. Just 4 bars, to check the tuning, to feel it back in her hands. Then she stopped, looked up, and went inside. Camille and I have not repaired what was between us. I do not think repair is the right word for what is possible there. What we have now is honest. When we are at family events, she speaks to me directly and I speak to her directly, and we are both aware of the years when that was not how it went, and neither of us pretends otherwise. She told me once, briefly, at a birthday gathering in the spring, that she had not known how far the trust provisions went. I believed her about the extent. I did not entirely believe her about the not knowing. But I said I understood because I did understand, and because understanding is not the same as forgiveness and does not require it to be real. Daniel and I are fine. We were always going to be fine. He spent 3 days after the Sunday meeting working through his feelings about the 9 years he had not fully seen, and then he came to me and said that he was sorry and that he wanted to understand better what I had been carrying. We talked for most of an evening. It was the longest honest conversation we had ever had, and also the easiest, because by that point there was nothing left to protect. The thing I keep coming back to when I think about all of it is the video. Not mine. Ren's. The video she recorded in the garage on a Sunday afternoon when she was 11 years old, holding her receipt toward the camera and explaining, in her careful, precise voice, who owned what and why. I did not teach her to do that. I had not told her to document anything. She had watched me, over years of quiet building and careful filing and strategic patience, and she had understood something essential, that the most powerful thing a person can have is not money or property or professional standing. It is a record. It is the evidence of your own existence, kept in your own hand, before anyone tries to tell you you were never there. She had that at 11. I did not fully have it until 34, but we both have it now. Here is the question I want you to answer, because I have been thinking about it since October, and I still do not have a clean answer. I kept 9 years of silence before I filed anything. I built in private, I deflected, I let Dolores believe what she wanted to believe for the better part of a decade. And when I finally moved, I moved on everything at once. Some people in my family say I could have handled it differently, that I should have told Daniel sooner, that I should have confronted Dolores before it ever got to a legal filing. Maybe they are right. Maybe there was a version of this that cost less. But I keep coming back to the living room on Birchwood Drive and the 4 documents on the table, and the moment Dolores looked at the recorder's filing and stopped managing and started reckoning. I keep thinking about Wren, in the corner with her book, asking for noodles on Garfield Street. I keep thinking about the violin, back in its case, her name still on the card inside. So tell me honestly, did I wait too long, or was the timing exactly right?